They built 110 luxury homes on my land while I was away. The greedy HOA thought they had stolen my family's forest forever. They didn't know I was a paralegal at the best law firm in town. Now they're finished building, they're about to discover my perfectly laid legal trap. Before watching full video, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. Your property has been fully developed. Construction is complete. The voice on the phone delivered these impossible words as casually as if telling me about the weather. I gripped my cell phone so hard my knuckles turned white. There must be some mistake, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I own that land. No one has permission to build anything. Sir, I'm looking at 110 new homes, all part of Oak Ridge Estates. The HOA inauguration ceremony is tomorrow. The phone slipped from my hand, clattering on the hardwood floor of my apartment. 200 acres of pristine forest. My inheritance, my birthright, my grandfather's legacy, supposedly now covered with luxury homes I never authorized. My mind raced with questions. How? When? Who would dare? And most importantly, did they have any idea who they were messing with? My grandfather had purchased this property back in the 1950s for almost nothing, a shrewd investment that had appreciated 100-fold since then. Before he passed away 5 years ago, he made me promise to keep the land intact, to resist the developers who would inevitably come knocking. This land is special, Daniel, he told me, his voice weak but determined. Don't let them chop it up and cover it with concrete. I had every intention of honoring that promise. I'd visited the property monthly, hiking through the woods, maintaining the small cabin near the creek, and keeping the property taxes paid. It was my sanctuary away from my job as a paralegal at Hartman & Associates, one of the most prestigious law firms in the state. That's why I felt my blood run cold when I rounded the bend in the dirt access road and saw bulldozers tearing through my trees. What the hell is going on here? I shouted over the roar of engines, waving my arms frantically. A man in a hard hat and reflective vest approached with a clipboard. Sir, you're trespassing on a construction site. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Trespassing? My voice cracked. This is my property. I'm Daniel Mercer, and this land has been in my family for decades. The foreman looked genuinely confused. That's not possible. This land belongs to the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. We have all the permits and approvals. Construction started 3 months ago. 3 months. I'd been away caring for my mother after her hip surgery. 3 months without visiting the property, and somehow they'd started building homes on my land. Show me the paperwork, I demanded. He handed me a thick folder. The permits, the surveys, the approval stamps, everything looked legitimate. But it was impossible. I paid my taxes. I had the deed. There's been a mistake, I said, trying to stay calm. A serious one. I need you to stop construction immediately while I sort this out. The foreman shook his head. Can't do that. We've got 110 homes already pre-sold. The foundation work is complete on 60 of them, and framing has started on 20. If you've got a claim, take it up with the city or the HOA. I just follow orders. I looked past him at the devastation. Nearly a third of my forest was already gone, replaced by dirt roads and concrete slabs. The sight made me physically ill. Who runs this HOA? I asked. Gerald Whitman. Real estate developer. Offices in downtown Millfield. The name hit me like a slap. Gerald Whitman. The same man who had tried to buy my grandfather's land for years, offering increasingly large sums that my grandfather had always refused. I pulled out my phone and snapped photos of everything, the construction, the permits, the workers. Tell Mr. Whitman that Daniel Mercer will be in touch. And tell him to enjoy his freedom while it lasts. The county records office confirmed what I already knew. I was the legal owner of the property. The deed was clear, the boundaries unmistakable. Someone had falsified documents, bribed officials, or both. I drove straight to the law firm where I worked. My boss, Margaret Hartman, was one of the toughest attorneys in the state, specializing in property disputes and fraud. They've already built on 60 lots, I explained, spreading the photos across her desk. They're selling homes on land they don't own, my land. Margaret examined the documents with narrowed eyes. This is blatant fraud, but it's also complicated. Construction has already begun. People have purchased homes. The HOA will argue that stopping now would harm innocent buyers. So they steal my land and get away with it? I clenched my fist. I didn't say that. Margaret leaned back in her chair. In fact, this situation might work in your favor, if you're willing to play the long game. What do you mean? If we'd caught this earlier, we could have simply stopped construction. Now we have something better, Leverage. Every home they build on your land increases their liability. Every dollar they invest strengthens our position. A slow smile spread across my face as I understood. We don't stop them, I said. We let them finish. Exactly. Margaret nodded. We document everything, build an airtight case, and when the time is right, we drop the hammer. For the next 6 months, I watched and waited. Every weekend, I parked at the public road near my property and documented the construction progress. I researched the buyers, attended HOA meetings posing as a prospective homeowner, and gathered evidence. The Oak Ridge Estates HOA was exactly the kind of organization that gave homeowners associations a bad name. Gerald Whitman had installed himself as president for life. The bylaws were restrictive to the point of absurdity. No visible satellite dishes, no vehicles older than 5 years parked in driveways, mandatory landscaping requirements that could only be fulfilled by Whitman's brother-in-law's company. The houses were beautiful McMansions, each selling for over $800,000. Gerald had turned my $2 million property into a $90 million development. And he thought he'd gotten away with it. On move-in day for the first 30 families, I watched from a distance as new homeowners carried boxes into their dream homes, children played in freshly sodded yards, and Gerald Whitman cut a ceremonial ribbon at the entrance to the community. Oak Ridge Estates represents the future of luxury living in Millfield, he announced to applause. A harmonious community with state-of-the-art homes nestled in natural surroundings. The natural surroundings he'd stolen from me. Margaret and I filed our lawsuit the next day. Not against the homeowners, they were innocent victims, but against Whitman, his development company, the HOA, the city officials who'd approved the permits without proper verification, and the title company that had facilitated the fraud. The first HOA meeting after the lawsuit was filed was chaos. I attended openly this time, sitting quietly in the back of the community center as Gerald Whitman tried to reassure angry homeowners. This is nothing but a nuisance lawsuit, he insisted, his face red. Some nobody trying to get rich quick by making false claims. The development is perfectly legal. A woman in the front row stood up. Then why does the county recorder show that the land belongs to Daniel Mercer? I checked myself after getting the lawsuit notice. And why did my title insurance company call me today? Asked another homeowner. They're opening an investigation. Whitman loosened his tie. These are technical issues. Nothing to worry about. I raised my hand. When Whitman reluctantly acknowledged me, I stood. My name is Daniel Mercer. This land has been in my family for 3 generations. Mr. Whitman tried to buy it from my grandfather multiple times and was refused. When I was caring for my sick mother, he took the opportunity to falsify documents and steal my property. I have the original deed, tax records showing my continued ownership, and witnesses who can testify that Mr. Whitman was fully aware this land belonged to me. The room erupted. Homeowners shouted questions, demands, threats, some directed at Whitman, some at me. What happens to our homes? Someone yelled. I raised my hands for quiet. I don't want to punish innocent families. You are victims in this too. My attorney and I have proposed a solution that will allow you all to keep your homes, but it requires removing the current HOA leadership and making restitution for the stolen property. Whitman lunged toward me. You little? 2 homeowners stepped between us. The community security officer escorted Whitman from the room as he continued to shout threats. The legal battle was brutal. Whitman had powerful friends and deep pockets. He countersued me for defamation. He claimed my grandfather had verbally agreed to sell him the land. He produced witnesses who swore they'd seen documentation I knew had never existed. But Margaret was better. She deposed county employees who admitted they'd approved permits without proper verification after pressure from Whitman's political allies. She found the notary who had validated the falsified deed and got him to confess to fraud in exchange for leniency. She subpoenaed bank records showing suspicious payments to city officials. While the case wound through the courts, life at Oak Ridge Estates grew increasingly tense. The homeowners, facing the possibility of losing their investments, split into factions. Some wanted to settle with me at any cost. Others believed Whitman's promises that he would prevail. The HOA itself became a battlefield. After 3 emergency meetings, the homeowners voted to remove Whitman and install new leadership. The new board president, a retired judge named Helen Fujita, approached me with a proposal. We want to make this right, she said during our meeting at Margaret's office. The homeowners had no idea they were buying stolen property. Most of us have our life savings tied up in these homes. I understand that, I said. I never wanted to punish the families. Judge Fujita nodded. We've calculated the fair market value of your land, plus damages for the trees removed and the distress caused. We're prepared to offer you $12 million, to be paid by the HOA through a special assessment and increased dues. Margaret and I exchanged glances. The offer was substantial, far more than the land was worth, but it didn't address the broader issue of Whitman's fraud. The money is only part of it, I said. Whitman needs to face consequences. We agree, said Judge Fujita. The HOA has filed its own lawsuit against him for fraud and misrepresentation. We've also reported him to the State Real Estate Commission and the District Attorney. It was a good start but still not enough. I have a counter-proposal, I said. I'll accept $8 million for the land, its true value, but with conditions. First, the restrictive HOA rules are replaced with sensible guidelines that respect homeowners' autonomy. Second, the remaining undeveloped 40 acres of my property is placed in a conservation trust, permanently protected from development. Third, the HOA commits to replanting native trees throughout the community. Judge Fujita considered this. The financial terms are acceptable. The conservation trust is a wonderful idea. The replanting will enhance property values. But some homeowners bought specifically because of the strict HOA rules. Those rules were created by a criminal to control people and extract money, I pointed out. Reasonable guidelines protect property values without micromanaging people's lives. After further negotiation, we reached an agreement. The settlement was presented to the homeowners, who approved it by a narrow margin. The 40 acres of forest would remain untouched. Native trees would be planted throughout the development. The HOA rules were rewritten to focus on safety and basic maintenance rather than aesthetic control. Gerald Whitman didn't go down easily. He fled the state when criminal charges were filed, but was arrested 3 months later in Arizona. He faced multiple felony counts of fraud, falsification of documents, and bribery of public officials. At his trial, I testified about my grandfather's love for the land and Whitman's repeated attempts to buy it. Former city employees testified about the pressure and bribes they'd received. The notary described how he'd been paid to validate fraudulent documents. The jury took less than 4 hours to find him guilty on all counts. The judge, citing the calculated nature of the fraud and the many lives disrupted, sentenced him to 15 years in prison and ordered him to pay restitution. As Whitman was led away in handcuffs, he glared at me with pure hatred. I felt nothing but relief. My grandfather's land hadn't been preserved exactly as he'd wished, but a significant portion would remain forest forever. The rest had become homes for families who now valued the land almost as much as I did. 1 year later, I stood at the edge of the conservation area, watching volunteers from Oak Ridge Estates plant oak saplings along the border between the forest and the development. Judge Fujita, now a friend, handed me a shovel. Your grandfather would be proud, she said. You found a way to honor his wishes while also creating a community. I dug a hole for a sapling, remembering my grandfather's words about the specialness of this land. The irony, I said as I carefully placed the young tree in the ground, is that Whitman could have had a successful development without resorting to fraud. He could have approached me honestly, proposed a development that preserved part of the forest, and I might have agreed. Judge Fujita nodded. Greed blinds people to ethical solutions. I patted soil around the sapling. In the end, his dishonesty cost him everything and gave us something better than either of us had originally envisioned. Beyond us, children from the development rode bikes along the new nature trail that wound through both the conservation area and the community. Their parents, now my neighbors in many ways, worked alongside environmental volunteers to restore what had been damaged. Whitman had seen my land as nothing but dollar signs. He'd built 110 homes thinking he'd pulled off the perfect crime, never imagining he was actually constructing the instrument of his own downfall, a community that would ultimately unite against him and with me to create something that honored the land rather than simply exploiting it. As I stood back to admire our newly planted tree, I couldn't help but smile. Sometimes justice comes in unexpected forms, and sometimes when you play the long game, you end up with something far more valuable than simple revenge.